Welcome back to the Accessible Art History YouTube channel. This summer, I decided to give myself a graduation present and plan a trip to New York City. There are so many museums that I want to visit, including the Museum of Modern Art, also known as the MOMA. I thought it would be fun to share my top 5 works at the MOMA that I plan on seeing while there. There are so many pieces to see, it was honestly hard to narrow it down to 5. So make sure to check out the Accessible Art History Instagram at accessible.art.history for a bonus 6th work. So, to see my picks and learn more about the museum, keep on watching. Before we get into the works of art, I think it's important to go over the history of the museum first. Located in Midtown Manhattan, the Museum of Modern Art is one of the most important and one of the largest museums of modern art in the world. Its collections focus heavily on the modern and contemporary art movements and is filled with some of the most famous pieces from the Western canon of art history. Over 1 million people visit the museum on average each year, making it the 25th most popular museum in the world. The MoMA was the brainchild of Abby Aldrich Rockefeller, the wife of John D. Rockefeller Jr., and two of her friends, Lily P. Bliss and Mary Quinn Sullivan. Using their wealth and already impressive personal collections, the group opened a modest gallery space at the Heckscher Building at 730 Fifth Avenue on November 7, 1929. Fascinatingly, this was only 9 days after the Wall Street crash that kicked off the Great Depression. The new museum was one of the first in the state to exhibit modern art. A. Conger Goodyear was appointed the first president of the MoMA by Abby Rockefeller. He was well known in modernist circles and helped greatly to expand the collections. 2 major exhibits on Vincent van Gogh and Pablo Picasso helped boost the MoMA into international renown. The curators used this fame to create a unique show called Indian Art of the United States in 1941. This exhibition completely shifted the way that the American public saw art of the First Nations and helped bring light to their amazing contributions to the art world. Today, the MoMA holds over 150,000 pieces in its collection, carefully curated over the last 90 years. I can't wait to see as many of them as possible while I visit. So now that we've got a bit of the history out of the way, let's dive into the works. Vincent van Gogh is one of my personal favorite artists, so I'm excited to see Starry Night in person. Not only is it one of the most famous works in art history, but it has also come to symbolize the artist himself. The swirling colors of the night sky and stars contrast with the sleepy village below. Van Gogh used color and line to transport the viewer into a new world. It is an excellent example of the post-impressionist style. The MoMA acquired this piece as a part of the Lily P. Bliss bequest. Bliss was an avid art collector and was one of the founding patrons of the museum, as I mentioned before. After her death, her impressive collection of post-impressionism works were given to the museum. The MoMA considers these works to be a part of their founding collection. And thanks to the kindness of Lily P. Bliss, the world is able to enjoy these masterpieces for generations to come. I highly recommend checking out the MoMA site on this piece. I've linked it down below because they have a ton of great resources, including a really cool 3D model that allows you to see the paint texture. And if you want to learn more about Starry Night, I have an entire podcast episode. And if you want to learn even more about Starry Night, I have an entire podcast episode that I did on it, and you'll find it linked as well. Les Demoiselles d'Avignon was painted by Pablo Picasso in 1907. At first glance, it appears to be fairly standard Picasso cubist work. However, this piece actually represents an incredible shift in artistic composition. Its flat two-dimensionality, combined with blatant sexuality and jagged lines, were shocking to the public. Picasso was inspired by African masks, in a style dubbed Primitivism. Please note that this name has fallen out of favor and is highly offensive, not to mention incorrect. But it's still important to note that this was a term used in 20th century art historical text, in case you come across it in your own research. And just like Starry Night, this piece was also a part of the Bliss bequest. Again, if you want to learn more about this work of art, I have an entire podcast episode on it. You'll find it linked. Painted in 1931, The Persistence of Memory by Salvador Dali is considered one of the most iconic pieces of the 20th century. The quote, melting clocks have captured our imaginations and sparked many philosophical debates. For this work, Dali was experimenting with the concept of hard versus soft, and how we could reverse our normal conceptions of it. His surrealist style is evident with this anecdote. When asked if he was inspired by Albert Einstein's new theory of relativity and time, he said no. Instead, Dali said he was inspired by a camembert cheese melting in the sun. I don't know about you, but this certainly made me chuckle. Another comparison made with this piece is with Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights. The terrifying and fantastic work was studied by Dali and likely inspired his own style. This work has been in the collection of the MoMA since 1934, when it was anonymously donated to the museum. I have always been fascinated by Roy Lichtenstein and his puppet art pieces. There's such a clear departure from the works that I normally study, I can't help but be fascinated. This piece, called Drowning Girl, was created in 1963. Like many of his earlier pieces, Lichtenstein utilized actual comics as the foundation of his work. He sampled a page from issue 83 of The Secret Hearts, a romance comic book. It was illustrated by Tony Abruzzo and was published by DC Comics the year before. In this piece, Lichtenstein zooms in on a drowning girl as she states starkly, "I don't care." It's both stark and emotional, a play in contrast. There are small differences between Lichtenstein's and Abruzzo's pieces. Wording, lines, scale, etc. mark them as two separate works. This piece, and others by Lichtenstein, have continued to start conversations about authorship, sampling, and originality. The Museum of Modern Art required Drowning Girl in 1971 thanks to Philip Johnson and Mr. and Mrs. Begley Wright. The final piece of this video has always made me smile, called Broadway Boogie Woogie, and was painted by Piet Mondrian in 1940. The title and composition are so interesting, I can't help but to be intrigued. Mondrian was one of many artists that fled to America at the start of World War II. He had already established his style, consisting of primary colors and straight lines. But when creating Broadway Boogie Woogie, he divided the squares and blocks into smaller segments, mimicking the chaotic streets of New York City. The name itself comes from the distinct jazz style that Mondrian was fond of. This work was purchased by Brazilian sculptor Maria Martins after it was exhibited at a gallery in 1943. It was later donated to the MOMA. These are only 5 masterpieces from the Museum of Modern Art. This museum is one of the premier modern art institutions, so it's truly hard to narrow it down. I can't wait to visit this summer and see them for myself. And don't forget to go over to Instagram for a bonus 6th work.